Hello. Hi. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the post... Yes, that was played for. Welcome back to the post-lunch session where we'll continue this morning's conversation, but a more granular look through one of the thematic sessions. And I'm glad to say that capacity building for localization is going to be moderated by a dear colleague and friend, Emilia Saiz, who's the Deputy Secretary General, United Cities and Local Governments. So, Emilia, the floor is yours. Go for it.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you very much, everybody, for making it on time after lunch. When we realized that this moment would be happening, and we were not that sure that it would be happening during the high-level political forum, we thought, what would be that one thing that local government networks can actually bring to the discussions from a different perspective to this discussion. And then we thought that capacity building was probably very important. And capacity building, from the way that we hope this conversation will go, is not about training only, is not about learning only, but capacity building is actually about empowering. It's about political will. It's about creating the enabling environment for actors to actually be able to participate. And this is a very important notion to start the session with, because what we would like to share with you is how we feel our constituency needs to be strengthened and needs to be enabled to participate in this discussion. We've got a long way to go, a long, long way to go. We've been here for almost a week now, starting the second week. This is the reason why you don't see many of our elected officials that were with us last week, but you know it's difficult for them to be there 2 weeks. We've got a long way to go because the local perspective of SDG implementation is not there yet. I mean, everybody understands and is discussing SDGs in a pretty clustered manner. I was surprised about it. I mean, everybody say they help us to align, they help us to mainstream, they help us with an integrated approach. But still, when you look at the different sessions, the different side events that have been organized, and even the way that many of the voluntary national reports have been conceived, they are still pretty siloed in approach. Now, if we silo the SDGs, it will be very difficult to rally the potential of local and regional governments around the world, because local and regional governments, that sphere of government, cannot possibly deal with things in silos. And that is the narrative that we need to change. So there are two things that I would like, and hopefully that you will bring away from this session, is the notion of capacity building as something else than training and a learning experience, which, yes, we want to create, but it's not only that. We need much more than that. And also the need to put sustainable urbanization in a different place in the development agenda. We need to realize that the involvement of all spheres of government, that local, that Agenda 2030, if we want to talk about it locally, it needs to be an all-government agenda. An all-government agenda is all spheres of government with civil society holding them accountable. And so what do we need to do to actually enable that? What do we need to do? Now, the first thing that we need to do is actually make it known. We need to raise awareness, and that is something that we have been doing. And what I propose today is to share with you the political perspective that Barry is going to bring to us. How are we experiencing this agenda as constituency? Then I would like to bring in two key partners for us in capacity building and the notion of localization, UNDP and UN Habitat, who were talking about localization with us, with our constituency, before anybody else was talking about this, and that needs to be acknowledged, strengthened, and recognized. And then I would bring in the networks of local government, because even if you see few of us here, is many of us that we do represent. And we've got colleagues from many different associations with us. So that's the proposal. And without further ado, I would give the floor to my treasurer and my friend and the mayor of Kitchener, Honorable Vrbanovic. I know he finds it funny when we call him that.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Emilia, and it's certainly a pleasure to be here with all of you again this afternoon after what I think was a very good session this morning, where we had the opportunity to speak about this issue with the representatives of the nation states that are here this week discussing these important issues. I think, you know, as I reflected on this morning's session in particular, I couldn't help but note the comments of Michelle Giles-McDonough, who was here this morning and is the director of the Sustainable Development Unit in the Executive Office of the Secretary General. And in her comments, she talked about the agenda needs to get to households so nobody is left behind. And as I reflected on those comments, I couldn't help but think, quite frankly, the journey that I think all of us still have to get to actually get it down to the household level. Because while we have been doing significant work at UCLG through the Global Task Force of Local and Regional Governments for a number of years, and while we've been working with our national local government associations and so on to advance the SDG agenda, to advance the advocacy around it, and to do a lot of the work that's necessary from a capacity building point of view. As I said at our strategic planning session at UCLG back in February, we're still a long way off from the average citizen understanding what the SDGs are and all of the work that needs to be done to achieve them over the next number of years. I know that later on in the discussion this afternoon, we're going to be getting into the whole issue of capacity building, so I'm not going to say a lot about that right now, but I will talk a little bit about the point that Emilia made around the 2030 agenda and the link to sustainable urbanization. And I think it goes without saying that the point that was made this morning, that the 2030 agenda is in fact an urban agenda. And the achievement of the 2030 agenda cannot be detached from ensuring sustainable urbanization. With urban areas housing half of the global population, you will also find an increasing proportion of the most vulnerable living there. Urbanization does not affect cities alone, but all the surrounding territories, and addressing sustainable urbanization will also help ensure sustainable territorial development, addressing the rural-urban continuum. Even in my own country, we know that this is a very sensitive issue. You know, with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities as an example, whenever we start talking about urban issues, we're very much often reminded from our rural counterparts that the issues that we face in, for example, Canada's 22 largest cities are also the cities that or the impact that our other 4,000 roughly municipalities across the country are facing. And if we're going to deal with our challenges, we need to deal with them together and collaboratively. Current trends will transform the balance between and within regions. The Global South, particularly Asia and Africa, will complete the transition to an urbanized world. The relationship between urban and rural areas is evolving. The borders between the two are becoming increasingly blurred, and they're ever more interdependent. Getting cities right in addressing local governance and capacities, paying special attention to intermediary cities that have an important role to play as service hubs, will offer the opportunity to contribute to rural prosperity and preserving rural livelihoods. The rural and urban agenda is intrinsically linked and are a critical component of the development agenda. Ignoring this will be missing the opportunity to address the kinds of inequalities, the protection of ecosystems, and the creation of jobs that are contemplated through some of these 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Thus, what is clear is that the resources needed for urbanization and all its related social and environmental implications will be hugely significant, though to what extent, I don't believe is fully understood by any of us yet. The current model of development is generating both new opportunities and new social and political threats. Urbanization is positively correlated with growing incomes and human development indicators. However, this model also has dramatic consequences for the environment, including natural resource depletion, the impoverishment of biodiversity, climate change, and the increasing impact of natural disasters on cities and territories. New patterns of production and consumption are essential for sustainable development, and the time available to make these changes and prevent irreparable damage to our planet, as we know, is fast running out. The cost of failing to deal with urban growth now will be vast, and the next 20 years will be critical to urgently bringing about structural changes to the way in which we approach development. And addressing the sustainable urbanization agenda as part and parcel of the 2030 agenda and making local governments up to the challenge is going to be critical as we go forward. So I think we have an opportunity today and in the days ahead and in the months ahead to certainly do a lot of great work, particularly in collaboration between both national and subnational governments in terms of the localization of the SDGs. And hopefully all of us are up to rolling up our sleeves and getting the job done in that time period so that we can see some real positive steps forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, I think it does deserve a round of applause. I think you've left a couple of very important issues in terms of the type of themes that we would need to address in capacity building of local government. And I think consumption and production is one of those things that we don't talk enough about, that will become extremely important when we discuss protecting environment, but also tackling climate change, but also creating a new social contract and ensuring the right to the city for our communities. So it's very important one, and also finance. I think rethinking the way that we finance the local level will be extremely important. So those two key themes to be addressed. I think I promised you we would have feedback from UNDP and from UN Habitat. I'm not sure that the deputy director of UN Habitat is there already, because is she available already? Can you confirm? So we'll give her the floor first, simply because she's in Nairobi. It's extremely late already there, and she's been very kind and patiently waiting for us. So. Are we going to actually see her as well? Yeah, looks like it.
I can hear you now.
Hello? Yes. Aisha, can you hear me? This is Emilia speaking.
Emilia, I can hear you from afar.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine, and the whole room does, actually. Can you hear me better now, Aisha?
Okay, that's really good.
Very good. So I wanted to invite you, Aisha. I was saying here to our colleagues that are joining us, and you cannot see us, but it's a pretty full room here in room 5 at the UN headquarters. I was sharing with them that UN Habitat and UNDP and the Global Task Force have been discussing and talking about localization. Uy, you are there. Yes, we can also see you now.
Hello.
That that we have been discussing localization even before anyone else in the system was contemplating this notion. And as a matter of fact, when the SDGs were not even formally born, we were already talking about localizing the 2030 agenda. So I wanted to give you, and you know I am strict in this, maximum 3 minutes to explain what does that entail for UN Habitat, and why have you always considered that this was an important approach? What is localization for you? And why do you consider it so important? And that is in 3 minutes, my sister, and I will cut you, you know I will.
Well, thank you very much, Emilia. First of all, let me thank you and all our other colleague partners, whether UCLG, the Global Task Force for Local and Regional Governments, UNDP, and all partners who have been part and parcel of this journey, which we really believe is very critical. I would like also to thank you for allowing and facilitating me with our team at UN Habitat to join this. And I would like to also emphasize, as you've just requested me, first of all, to emphasize the importance that for us at UN Habitat, we really feel it's very important for us to focus on the localization of SDGs. As you're all aware, we are the focal point for local and regional governments within the UN system. And hence, we are committed to supporting this process, both technically and politically, and ensure that it helps us to deliver at the local level. And why do we say so? We realize that it's through localizing of these SDGs that we'll be able to create a bridge between all the global agendas, whether the 2030 agenda, the Paris Agreement, the Addis. That's the only way we'll be able to bring everything together with a new urban agenda and make it clear what is it that we're going to be doing at national level and how all these levels will support implementation at local government level. As you will all recall, last year in Quito, in Habitat 3, we endorsed the new urban agenda, and paragraph 9 clearly indicates that the implementation of the new urban agenda contributes to the implementation of the 2030 agenda for sustainable development in an integrated manner, and to the achievement of all the SDGs, including goal number 11, that is focused on making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. This is our vision and desire. How do we achieve it? We believe that in localizing SDGs, we'll be able to accelerate the implementation of these global agendas by addressing the needs for enabling the national framework, especially by supporting the empowerment of local governments. And what we mean by empowerment is really through enhancing their capacity in terms of human resources, in terms of financial, fiscal resources, but also clearly in terms of attributing and giving them a level of authority that's adequate and clear accountability and follow-up frameworks. And it's only through that we'll be able to have local governments that can effectively mobilize resources right from their community members and also the various stakeholders to enable the relevant investment that will support the implementation of the SDGs in an inclusive manner. So at UN Habitat, I would like to highlight a few quick points in the areas that we feel specifically need to be addressed with our partners that I just mentioned. And one of them is we need to have clear access to reliable local disaggregated data, awareness raising at the local level on the SDGs, knowledge sharing and capacity development for local governments on the localization of the SDGs, integrated governance structures, and strong partnerships. And we do believe, if I could just highlight quickly, for the first one, for instance, on the local and disaggregated data, I'm delighted also to inform members who are here present that we've been working with the partners to look at ways that we could provide tools that can support availability in an evidence-based manner of the data that we're talking about here. It's very important that we have data that's measurable and that is going to help accountable decision-making. All too often we talk about it, but when it comes to reality, actually, sometimes it's not available. So in order for us to be able to do this, we've developed a tool that we call the City Prosperity Initiative. And quickly, the City Prosperity Initiative is going to help local governments and all leaders to be able to identify from a spatial perspective spatial indicators such as for street connectivity, public space, economies of agglomeration, and be able to identify opportunities and challenges that cities are facing. Secondly, is through this mechanism, the same tool, able to look at how we can turn our policies and plans into actionable programs on ground, and how those programs can engage and influence and connect the urban poor and marginalized with the resourceful and the vibrant parts of the city. And all that needs to be done in an integrated manner. I'm pleased to note that we already have 400 cities that have already taken this on, ranging from Colombia,
you need to wrap up,
Mexico,
Aisha.
Egypt, Ethiopia, and the rest of it. Pardon?
You will need to start to wrap up. So can you leave us with your last thought on this?
Yes, I'm moving quickly. We need also to look at how to empower local governments, which I just talked about, in terms of the knowledge and having a clear way of communicating to them. And with that, with UNDP and the Global Task Force, we've developed a roadmap for localizing the SDGs and what local governments need to know, for them to be able to understand what they need to know and to be able to roll it out in their communication and awareness raising. The third point, of course, is around capacity and knowledge development. And I'm again pleased to note that, again, with our partners, we've been able to create this platform that will be a platform for them to share knowledge and experience and networking on localizing the SDGs, and that is also available. I think the last point I want to talk about now is, in terms of integrated governance, we believe that using tools like the national urban policies, we should be having a way of strategically engaging national governments with local governments in a very structured policy and resource manner that will be able to support national governments to know where to begin from, but also the UN and the other international systems to know how they can support this whole process that we're talking about. Finally, the issue of partnerships. It's very, very important. And I also want to really thank recently Council, we had the partnership between the World Bank and us that is going to create a funding mechanism to support local governments and national governments. I think, Emilia, I'll stop there, knowing very well that you know quite a lot about what I'm talking about. You will compliment me with colleagues from UNDP. But once again, many thanks. I'd have loved to listen to you, and I think maybe I'll stick in there to hear some of it, but it's getting a little bit late from this end. Maybe I'll stick around and just listen. So thank you so much for this moment.
Thank you, Aisha. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We fully understand you need to leave us, but it's very interesting information you've left, and this is where I actually would like to pick up with you, Pedro. Pedro Conceicao is the Director of Strategic Policy of UNDP, and I think it would be interesting for you to go a little bit more into detail about what this roadmap that we have developed together would entail. I mean, Aisha has already introduced a little bit. It's about introducing what the agenda is for local governments. I mean, the connection between local government and Agenda 2030 is not that obvious. I mean, it's not obvious for the communities, but also sometimes not so obvious for local governments. It's about making sure that the current agenda of local governments is looked at with the prisma of the SDGs. I think that's an important effort to be made. Anything else that you would like to leave with us? Please, you've
3
got
minutes,
the floor.
right?
And it is 3 minutes.
Okay.
I gave her 1 extra minute only because she was in Nairobi.
Okay, thank you. So let me try to focus perhaps on two issues. First, why UNDP has been so committed to the localization agenda, and for us it's something very natural, and I'll try to explain why. And then just a few words on how we're doing our engagement on capacity building. So why is this important for UNDP? If we look at the 2030 agenda, there's a part of the agenda that's a little bit of a carryover of the MDGs. Where local and regional governments have a role to play if we think about delivery of services, for instance, education, health, water, sanitation. But there are two critical elements that are new in the SDGs that call upon engagement from local and regional authorities. The first is that the agenda, as we all know, is much broader in scope. So it's not only about the social goals of the MDGs, but includes also the environmental aspects, the sustainability aspects, and the aspiration of building peaceful and inclusive societies. So there is no way we're going to be able to achieve this if we don't engage at the local level, because it's at the local level that decisions on how we as humans, economic systems interact with ecosystems, that decisions are made on whether we are taking actions that lead us to the conservation of resources, or actually to the depletion of resources upon which all our futures depend upon. The second element that is new with the 2030 agenda compared to the MDGs is this pledge to leave no one behind. And it's not possible for us to meet this pledge if we do not reach the last mile of exclusion. And the last mile of exclusion has to be reached with the support, again, from the authorities that are closer to these people that are being excluded in both urban and in rural areas. So it's not going to be possible to meet the pledge of leaving no one behind if we don't understand the deeply entrenched drivers of exclusion that are understood better by local and regional authorities. That's why our engagement was so natural. Now, how are we doing this? First element is that we're doing everything with partnerships, because it's not possible for any single entity, not possible for UNDP, UN Habitat, or any other entity to achieve the SDGs without doing it together with others. So that's the first fundamental principle, the principle of partnership. Secondly, I really like the way you mentioned capacity building. It's not about training, it's not about a roadmap, it's not about the online platform, it's about empowerment. It's about providing tools to empower local and regional governments to be able to understand and make this connection between this global agenda that seems very abstract and the reality that people face every day. And I'll conclude with the third and final element, and this goes back to a point that Honorable Mayor to my right made, and my colleague Michelle also this morning. Ultimately, this agenda will only be implemented if it is meaningful to people. If people can make a connection between the goals and improvements in their daily life. And we can only do this with engagement, again, of local and regional governments in a way that brings this agenda and these goals to and makes a connection with their daily lives. Thank you.
And thank you very much for sticking to those 3 minutes in such an excellent manner, because that gives us a lot of room and hopefully to come back to you also when the discussion starts. I think this notion of capacity building as empowerment is extremely important for the work that we are trying to do together in the Hub, because the Hub, people keep asking us, hey, what's the Hub? You also have a Hub. How many Hubs do we have? We're very happy. Yeah, maybe it's not about doing additional things, but doing them with more people, maybe changing the way that we do some of the things. And empowerment is a very big part of it. I mean, yes, you need to learn from each other. You need to have an open mind and accept that maybe some people are tackling things in a better manner than you are. But you also need to be informed. And being informed is a very important part of empowerment. This is why I think local government networks have a very important role to play in informing. I mean, the way that we chose to come here to the high-level political forum this year was with a report informing our membership and trying to get from them information about how these 60-some countries that are informing here had been in contact with them. And that is a very important part of capacity building. If you don't realize how the conversations that you have been having with your national governments impact then on the global perception of what is being done, then it's very difficult for you to then impact back with local perspective those global actions. I think this Hub is a very important part of that chain of communication and of knowledge. So I really welcome the civil society networks that are here, the major groups that are around the table, and other partners, because they will be instrumental. Also, not only in keeping us accountable as local governments, but also informed. So I would like to now give the floor to this, what I'm going to try to have as a conversation with my colleagues from local and regional government networks. We've got C40 with us, we've got Energy for SD, which is the regional representation of local governments. We even have other colleagues from Metropolis that are around the table, and our Commission on Social Inclusion, and there is quite a lot of people around the table. We've got a representative of regional government with Flanders. What I have invited them to do is to answer or to organize their first round around three notions. I mean, what does it mean for you, capacity building, to your membership? What type of capacity building do you feel you need to provide? How are you organizing that? And how do you think that the hub would be useful for you? And you might want not to relate this only to capacity building, but to a broader part. And you don't need to answer all the questions. If you do answer all the questions, it will still need to be within 2 minutes for your starting round, okay? Because I would also like to give the opportunity to others in the room to come back. So, Emmanuelle, do you feel ready? You want to start, C40?
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and everyone. I have a short presentation. I don't know if we can show it. So, very quickly to answer your question in 2 minutes. So, first on what C40 is. So C40 is a network of 91 megacities working together to address climate change. So that's the first slide. Here you have the 91 members of C40. And so it's a network very focused on working on climate change with the big cities of the world. And how do we do this? Next slide, please. Basically by working at two different levels. One is the political level, and here you have a good picture of the current chair of C40, Mayor Anne Hidalgo from Paris, jointly with Mike Bloomberg, former mayor of New York City and former chair of C40, and Eduardo Paes, also a former chair of C40. And a lot of our work in the city diplomacy program of C40 is to engage mayors and bring their voice in the political stage and the international level to help them being recognized as global climate leaders. And this is a very fundamental part of our work, more and more important. When it comes to empowerment, of course, we are working very closely with the Global Task Force and other city networks in this. But we also work a lot at the technical level, and that's something we do by connecting city officials. The core work of C40 since the beginning has been very focused in developing networks of city officials from those 90 cities, member cities, who are brought together to exchange on their experience around designing and implementing climate policies in their cities. So we're having currently 17 different networks working on topics related to mitigation and adaptation to climate change. So that's policies around transport, building, waste management, economic development, water, etc., etc. So we have since the beginning those two angles, political and technical level.
Well, let me then ask you one thing. I mean, how this technical angle that you are presenting about supporting these member cities to actually address some of the issues on climate change, how is that being impacted by the SDGs? Do you relate it in some way? to SDGs, or because I think that's what we need to try to find out here as a hub. I mean, how are we going to rethink ourselves, reorganize ourselves to approach the whole agenda? Are you doing that already?
We are increasingly doing it, and actually this is the next slide is about climate and SDG, a single agenda. But to echo what the mayor was saying, it's a single urban agenda, definitely for us. But it's not only at the technical level, and I would say it's even more at the political level that this link is being made, because it's the mayors themselves who realize that it's very hard to work on climate change in cities without having a strong engagement strategies on other topics who are also strong priorities in cities, such as exclusion, segregation, job creation. So what we're seeing is that the mayors are increasingly asking us to support their advocacy on climate change, talking about the wider benefits of climate action. And this is what we call, in C40 language, inclusive climate action. So this is a new program that we are developing right now that aims at demonstrating very strongly that by doing climate action, that means reducing carbon emissions in cities and increasing resilience, you're also creating a wider range of benefits, like improving air quality, promoting economic development, etc., and reducing segregation. So and that is something that is being led and driven at the political level in first instance.
Okay, thank you very much, Emmanuelle. Do you mind leaving it there? Let us see if we manage to get you making additional comments at the end. I would like to go to Rodrigo, because this is another network, in this case of regional governments, and I know we always have these healthy tensions about, you know, urban versus territorial versus regional. I mean, the role, the visibility, and sometimes when we feel we are making huge progress because the city agenda is moving forward and the urban agenda is moving forward, then colleagues keep reminding us, yes, but this is not only about cities. So, Rodrigo, how does this, the enabling environment of the Habitat 3 agenda, the 2030 agenda, how is that impacting the way that you are making your membership ready for the next challenge? And show this is a healthy tension, please.
No, thank you very much, Emilia, for the opportunity to speak here. Indeed, I'm going to repeat, it's not just an urban agenda, it's an urban, a rural, it's, well, to all the dimensions of the territory, this agenda should be at least. And I really appreciate this opportunity in this moment because it shows the opportunity to have better coordination, and especially governance was something that was left out of the 2030 agenda. And now, mainly because local authorities didn't have a proper seat at the table. And now we actually might be able to overcome that. And so thinking at the UN system, how we can really insert our inputs. So as Emilia said, our network does work mainly on the level of regional governments, which is that level in between, let's call it like that, the national and the local levels. And we do work in many different agendas, and that is very helpful for us to enable this integration of the UN agendas and give that notion to our members. So we certainly promote the implementation of the SDGs combined with climate change, the urban agenda, and many different others. Thinking about capacity building, our organization understands it from many different notions. The first one is capacity building as raising awareness, but not just about information, but really when you talk about regional governments, they have direct competencies on planning, they have budget, they are responsible for implementing areas that are crucial for the SDGs. So thinking about that, we have to convince them of the added value of getting engaged in this agenda. So that is one of the elements we consider for capacity building that's directly connected to political representation. The other aspect that is much more connected to the technical representation that we do work a lot with is in terms of peer review. For Energy for SD, the capacity building, the power of capacity building is truly lies on peer review in terms of enabling the exchange of experiences of regional governments from different parts of the world. So think about that. Energy for SC organizes different kinds of projects and initiatives. For example, the Regions for Biodiversity Learning Platform, the Regions Adapt, which organizes online and in-person meetings to enable this kind of cooperation and exchange. A few weeks ago, we had a very interesting webinar, for example, where Flanders could share a little bit how they are integrating their existing sustainable development strategy and the SDGs. And at the same time, the representatives from Kenya, which unfortunately could not be here today, even though they were initially on the program. So we also worked on some publications, and especially for here, we brought a report on how much regional governments have been included in the voluntary national reviews. And we saw that while many of the national governments did mention the existence of their subnational governments, they weren't really consulted when it came in the process of elaborating those reports. So we really think that combining this action at the global level, but also at the same time working at the technical level with our members, we might actually be able to improve a little bit the implementation of the SDGs.
Thank you very much, Rodrigo. What we are trying to do together with this initiative that we mentioned before, UNDP, UN Habitat, the Global Task Force, we are developing, I think it's 4 modules of capacity building. We have developed one, which is on awareness raising. There have been, in the past months, there have been over 10 training of trainers already around this, linking SDGs and local government work, trying to share with our membership the notion that it is not that they need to then change their priority. We had a side event last week here, and someone said, I was implementing Agenda 21, so now what do I need to do? Do I need to change everything? And we're trying to show them, well, no, but, I mean, no, not everything, but you will need to look at things in a different way. So the second module is on alignment, and I think we're pretty far with that. And then we have 2 other modules that we need to decide what the exact content is going to be. But we are trying to create a very positive tsunami, constructive tsunami of training of trainers. We're trying to make sure that our membership, and that is our broad membership, is aware, and that they embrace this agenda. So I would like now to go to a regional government, to Flanders, and get from you a sense of how important is it for you that networks such as Energy for SD and others are working on that, and how does a government like yours face the agenda, when I know that local governments are extremely active in Belgium about this, and they've developed an excellent awareness raising campaigns. I'm very jealous about that. But the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for giving us the floor as Flanders region in Belgium. I just want to go one step back, and that is about sustainable development itself, because I think sustainable development is, in our opinion, the best concept to prepare our cities, our regions for the future. And I think it's very important that we can have training programs, that we have school programs to underline this. This Agenda 2030 is not the goal at itself for us, but is a mean to integrate sustainable development in a very holistic, transversal way. So I think the focus needs to be on the understanding of sustainable development itself, and then going to one of the tools. This is this Agenda 2030. 3 things are, I think, very important. What we did in Flanders is, first of all, we integrated sustainable development as concept in our constitution. So question 1 is sustainable development embedded in your constitution? Your regional constitution, your city constitution, your national constitution. So in Belgium case, it is included in the Belgian constitution since 2008 and in the Flanders constitution or decree, because on Flemish level it's called a decree. So we had a decree on sustainable development since 2007, 10 years ago. Secondly, I think it's very important, this is a political thing. So is there awareness in political parties in your region about sustainable development? Is this agenda or a link to this agenda included in the political party agenda of your political parties in your city and region? Because after all, it's a political thing. So next year we have local elections in Belgium in 2018, October 2018. So the goal is really to reach all candidate mayors of all cities in Belgium with this program. Thirdly, I think very important, before to start with a mapping exercise in what you do already in your region, is an exercise on future scenarios. Because Flanders, and I think a lot of regions and cities in the world, are in a massive changing situation of population growth, of new industrialization, circular economy models, etc., etc. A lot of things are changing very rapidly. So we need, first of all, a good scenario of what we think our region, our city will be like in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, 50 years' time. And that is what Flanders did with the Vision 2050. This was elaborated just before the approval of the Agenda 2030. So now we decided to have two phases into this vision and strategic program. First phase from now till 2030, and then look from 2030 to 2050. I think this sort of strategic and future scenarios are very important to know how you can link them. And that's where the mapping is coming in, how you can link the current processes of decision-making, of new laws, of supporting new action groups, etc., how they can strengthen the current initiatives that are really in line with this new Agenda 2030, first of all. And secondly, maybe more important, which laws are burdens for this agenda. Because when we did a review of a lot of legislation in Flanders, we saw a lot of those decrees on Flemish level need to be changed to achieve this agenda. Because a lot of...
You don't only have enablers, you also have bottlenecks.
Indeed,
actually.
Indeed. And the bottlenecks can be very harsh, can be very dramatic for this agenda. So the mapping is not only mapping of what we do good already, but certainly from a political perspective, where do we see the bottlenecks? Where do we see the problems occurring to implement this agenda? And last but not least, I have one.
Last one.
Okay, last one. So what are the challenges? I think a very important challenge is on local level to create awareness, indeed in a very large way, of the concept of sustainable development. That means a triple bottom line for our political elites, for our political groups. Certainly now that in this agenda we open this triple bottom line of people, profit, planet towards the 5 Ps. So we link this agenda from the triple bottom line to peace and partnership. Partnership is discussed already. I just want to add one thing. The peace perspective, peace, security and human rights perspective will be very important in this agenda. So this agenda, I think, is even more about strengthening our human rights than about sustainable development. Or other way around, and there I will close, no sustainable development processes without taking into account the legal perspective of supporting the human rights issues. So how you can become a human rights city, a human rights region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think there is very interesting work that has been done by the Danish government on linking human rights and SDGs. And the results of that work are really amazing because for those that have been a little bit critical on Agenda 2030 because it might not cover enough or build enough on human rights, if you go through that exercise that the Danish government has done, you will find amazing results. I mean, there is a very important link. But I agree with you. There are things that we need to be able to say out loud, and that needs to come to the center of the agenda. Human rights, but also governance, I think, is one of them. And I was thrilled that this morning issues like decentralization, which we call the D word, because we hardly ever speak about the D word here at the UN. I'm very happy that that came up this morning. I'm really amazed that it did, actually. So I think that is indeed a very good point. I know that Emmanuelle, something triggered in you when we said the last modules that we are developing, we still need to decide what they would contain. So do you promise me you will do very briefly intervention on that, or was it something else?
No, it was exactly that. Actually, to your question on how can we, what kind of capacity building can we offer to cities to deliver on this agenda? So for us, it's very clear that the three things that cities need to deliver more effectively, both on the Paris Agreement and the SDGs, which is a single agenda for us, is partnerships. So I think it was UNDP who mentioned this before. Thank you. And but the two other things, and this is a proposal for you to include, is data, of course. We do need a stronger support to city officials on data, and this is the next session, so that's perfect. Next
session will be on data.
And the other one is finance, and I think when it comes to precisely decentralization and empowerment, we also need to bring the discussion on finance not only to direct access by local governments to international finance or climate finance, but also, of course, the powers cities have to raise local finance and fiscal powers.
Okay, thank you very much, Emmanuelle. I told you I had an interesting panel, and I have only 2 minutes left, and I don't know how strict Paul is going to be with me. Paul, are you going to give me 5 more minutes or not even that? Whether I had 5 more minutes, please. The boss is behind you, and she's saying yes, yippee. So okay, so then we have. I would like to have some more feedback from the room, but I know Barry wanted to say something, and I wanted to give also the opportunity to Pedro to come back to some of the things that you have heard. Barry, your point.
Thank you. Just on 30 seconds on the. Am I on? Oh, there we go. On the finance piece, because I think the challenge that we find ourselves as local governments in many jurisdictions is the governing legislation, whether it's through constitutions or whatever, that set up the financial mechanisms for local governments have been in place for decades, in some cases, if not centuries. And the challenge that we have is the world is very different today, and the role that local governments play is very different today than it was at the time when this governing legislation was set up. And so the difficulty is going to be trying to, get into a discussion around this fiscal arrangement. And I mean, we're, as His Excellency Adam Vaughan will tell you, I mean, this is a conversation that's happening in Canada as well. And we're looking at all sorts of different ways to address it without actually getting at it, because it's a challenge, and it will be a challenge in many jurisdictions, but one that we're going to need to tackle if we're going to truly get at the heart of some of this.
Thank you very much. Pedro, did you want to come in on something?
Just very briefly to second and underline some of the points that Peter made at the very end on the importance of human rights and peace in the agenda, which I think is really one of the innovations of the 2030 agenda, is that it's first very clearly has a foundation of human rights, and then brings in this element of peace into a discussion and an agenda that emanates from development. And again, to emphasize the role of local and regional governments in enabling grievances, tensions to be addressed, and trust between people and authorities at a local level before things escalate into something that can be then much more difficult to handle.
Let me ask you one question, and I think culture is something that we are not talking about here, but I still think that culture is a very important dimension of sustainable development. Is a very important component of peace, and it's something that we think, in particular, our network. We are doing this exercise, and we have developed a training material on how to link, how your culture policies can support achievement of SDGs, which. I think that we already have a draft version of that, and it's part of our positive tsunami in capacity building. How does this sound to you? Why aren't we talking about culture? Peter, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, that's a very good question, because in the text, Agenda 2030, culture is only mentioned once as word. And then you have, of course, the idea of intercultural ideas, but I think it's key, of course it's key in this sort of agendas, because we know embedding sustainable development in your society starts with the link towards the values, the cultural traditions of your city, of your region, etc. So there needs to be ownership. And so to create ownership, to create the idea that people in your city, in your region, feel part of this story, there needs to be a cultural component. So therefore, we just celebrated our Flemish feast day a couple of days ago, the 11th of July last week. So without, so the challenge, one of the challenges is indeed how to create a future Flemish feast day that is based upon our history and tradition, and looking backwards to a feast day that is in line with this agenda for the future, and how to integrate this historical perspective with the future-proof perspective.
I'll make sure we send you this document that we have developed,
perfect.
and let's see whether it works for the Belgian local governments and for the regional governments as well. The floor is yours. Any questions? So I see 1, 2, 3. We'll start with that. Jeannie.
Though the subject has been local and regional government, we haven't heard too much about people and civic associations. So I'm wondering if the panelists would like to talk a little bit about that and how we can organize and involve. We all are giving lip service to the need to own this, but what are the processes for owning this?
Well, I said at the beginning that it was our effort to show the networks of local and regional government perspective to this session in particular, but we'll do our best to come back. And back there, please introduce yourself.
Sorry, I'm just... My question was quite similar to yours. It was about the people. So we've been talking about culture, we've been talking about human rights, and how to work with local citizens to apply the 2030 agenda. So my name is Eva Gurria. I'm a policy advisor at the Equator Initiative at UNDP, and we work with local communities and indigenous peoples who have a wealth of knowledge, who are investing in nature for sustainable development. So if we really think that the rural and the urban agenda are interlinked, I think it's something that we need to be talking about, even when we're addressing how to deal with 2030 at the city level.
Thank you very much. Point taken, and we'll address that question.
Hello, my name is Janine Jacob. I'm coming from Washington, D.C., focused on private sector integration. And my question was actually similar to both of yours. focused on the individual. But my question was, how do individuals know about the SDGs and how to get involved, what progress is being made, how to hold their governments accountable, particularly in an environment like now where you have a more hostile view of the media and less trust of our media institutions? Thank you.
Okay, so I'll invite the panelists to address that. Okay, the perspective that we have brought to you is what we are trying to do to raise awareness among our constituency, which does not imply in any way that our constituency shouldn't be working with the communities, because that's who they serve, and proximity is crucial to actually make that happen. There is, for us, it's a zero-sum game. I mean, we need to make it happen, and it needs to work. But I will not hide from you that it is extremely important to convince all the spheres of government that an active civil society is not the enemy, but that is actually there to help you, and same with private sector. But having said that, and we're really making efforts on this. I'm not saying we are perfect at all. Any of you would like to come back? Barry, you want to say something? Peter? Okay.
Well, I guess my response would be actually to go as far as saying local government is civil society, and civil society is local government, in fact. And I think we can never lose sight of that. I mean, as soon as those in elected office lose sight of the fact that they represent civil society, the system starts to flounder. And in fact, the only way we will achieve success in this or in anything that we do is through collaboration of the different spheres of government and all the other partners, whether it's academia, NGOs in our communities, individual citizens and the role they play, and so on. I think there's a lot that we can learn from the innovation sector as a whole. And the innovation sector has learned, particularly if you think about the whole startup culture and so on, is nobody has all the answers to everything, and where they work is where they're in these shared environments where they exchange ideas and come up with solutions. And quite frankly, if those of us, you know, working in environments like the UN and at the member state level and so on can actually start dealing with some of these bigger challenges in that way, collaboratively with all these partners, working on their own individual projects and coming together when they need to, I think we'd actually get a lot farther on some of these things.
Thank you. So I had Emmanuelle, Peter, and then all of you actually. So it would be fast.
I think there are two main groups in cities. So you have the citizens, the people that are really well connected with organizations, with NGOs, with city life in general, and their communication can go through, for example, what we call the local councils. For a lot of topics, each city in Flanders has its councils, citizens' councils, that give advice towards the local government. That's the easiest group to reach, because they are institutionally, in one or another way, institutionally linked with the local government, because they are active in organization, in a non-profit organization. The other group, I think, that is very important is to reach by, for example, the monthly or monthly magazines that most of our cities have in Flanders, or by social media, more and more by social media. This is when we want to reach the new future generations, we will need to use the media that they use. That means Snapchat and WhatsApp, etc.
Exactly. Thank you, Peter. Rodrigo.
Yes, thank you. No, just to comment. Usually we say that subnational governments are that is closest to citizens, because it's definitely way easier to access local government than it is to access a national government. And because of that, we can actually try to start changing the mindset that citizens have in terms of sustainable development. And not only on communication, I'd like to really emphasize the importance of education. And it's not as urgent as immediate effects as we would require for the SDGs, but especially on the longer term, having these included in the curriculum of education, either professional, basic, whatever level it is, and also to remind that actually local and regional governments in many countries do have direct responsibilities over this education curriculum. So that is a way of also including that. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuelle and Pedro.
Very quickly to answer this question. So I think, as Emilia was saying, there are very diverse situations in our constituency in terms of how the local governments work with the civic organization and how they integrate the population in their decisions. So there is no one answer on this, and we're aware that there is much work to be done in some regions on this. But I would like to revert actually the question, because in the climate world, at least where we're working a lot, we see that the civic organization and civil society doesn't really care about what mayors do and what local governments do, and they're only focusing on what national governments do. So this is also an invitation to citizen organizations to care about what their local governments do on climate change, on sustainable development or human rights, and to hold them accountable. And this is also a very important way of addressing this issue.
Indeed, I mean, communities care a lot about local government, what local governments do about their own local situation. Then when we go to the other level of advocacy at global level, then there tends to be a miscommunication between organized local government and organized civil society. The Habitat 3 process has been groundbreaking in overcoming some of those hurdles, and in particular we have teamed up around the right to the city efforts, and I think there is a great future in that, but absolutely there is an issue there. Pedro, you need to be really brief because I would like to give the floor to Kerry to finish this conversation.
So 30 seconds. In the lead up to the adoption of the agenda during the negotiations, there was an initiative called the My World Survey, which was very effective in ensuring that voices from citizens influenced were heard by negotiators. And in fact, there was a very strong collaboration with cities, including the city of Mexico City, which was able to mobilize 1 million votes for this survey. So this infrastructure is now being used by an initiative of the Secretary General called the SDG Action Campaign that I think can be very helpful to complement and work with civil society organizations in making this connection with citizens. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I wanted to remind you that the objective of this session was to focus on capacity building, and I think what we are bringing to you as a constituency is the notion that we are ready to learn, that we are ready to set up learning systems, that if you think we need to change our curricula on those learning systems, this is the place to do it. Tell us how we can enrich those systems of learning that we are developing. And Kerry, basically my question to you is: did we do a good job, and what is coming next?
Well, first I want to thank everyone here, and just for, as Emilia knows and as Emmanuelle knows and Barry knows, this Local 2030, we would not be sitting here today if it weren't for them. We would not have achieved so much from the Executive Office of the Secretary General on climate change at COP21 if it weren't for them. So I just want to thank the networks, I mean, from the Global Task Force to UCLG to C40 to ICLE. These networks have been critical to what the prior Secretary General and the current Secretary General are achieving with local governments and with the UN system to expand and increase and improve how the system is working with local governments. So I just really want to thank you and acknowledge how much this constituency has done for the UN system and really done for the world. I mean, it can't be overstated. What's next is a data session.
We'll promise
that was cheating. That was cheating. It was a terrible answer.
We'll promise to be extremely active in the data session. Don't call us only, don't call local governments only when things are going wrong. Please call on us when decisions need to be made and policy needs to be shaped. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, the networks, the governments, and colleagues.